Across America, live, this is Point of View. And now, Kirby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me. It is the Tuesday edition of Point of View, and we are going to cover quite a number of topics over the next couple of hours, so I hope you'll stay with us. Starting off with immigration, if for no other reason than so many of you listening to this program right now in this hour live in the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex. And guess what? We have 3,000 migrant children. I'm going to take on that issue in just a minute. That's how it's described in the first article I've posted here in The Hill. To the credit of the Dallas Morning News, they do talk about the fact that they are immigrant teens, a little different. And so we will get into some of that issue. What's going to happen right here in Dallas, a convention center full of thousands and thousands, not of children, because when I hear children, I don't know about you, but I'm thinking 5-year-old, 6-year-old, maybe 10-year-old. No, these are 15 to 17-year-olds. And by the way, there's a good reason to believe that some of them that say they're 17 are much older than that, you know. 15, yeah, that's, and do they speak English? Do they know, are they going to, and as some of us discussing, Doug in particular afterwards, are they going to be playing Ninto? Are we teaching them English? I'll talk about what the American Red Cross is going to do. Which, again, I thought this was a government thing. We're bringing in the nonprofit sector to help out with the government. Oh, what a concept. You know, these ones that get a tax benefit that now people want to take away from it because, after all, the government can cover it all. Oh, yeah. As soon as they get into one of these issues, we're calling on the American Red Cross to help out. So that's fine. We're all for that. These are children who find themselves here for a variety of reasons. Frankly, some of them may have been trafficked here. Some of them may be part of gangs. Do we have any belief that since they are going to be in Exhibit Hall F, that's where they're going to be located, which is really not a great place if you think about it. You're going to put cots in there. There's going to be, I think, a fairly long backlog for the men's room, unless they just say, well, we're going to let them go to both the men and the women's room. And they're just all sorts of what-if questions. So we're going to try to get into that in a little bit in terms of the issue of immigration. And then I didn't post this, but I did find it today, Rich Lowry. It's all Trump's fault. And it kind of relates to something I was reading just the other day by Gary Bauer. Everybody went out on the talking head shows on Sunday claiming that any problem they had with vaccine distribution, although that's going pretty well, but certainly with the border, well, that's definitely Trump's fault. And, of course, half a dozen other things are as well. And so there's just an inability of this administration, and in particular this president, to express any gratitude for the fact that he is depending the success this year on vaccines, which were actually developed in the previous administration, and you would not know that unless you, of course, read this article, which we'll read from. And while we're talking about vaccines, we are now testing vaccines on 6-month-old. Did you know that? Okay, that's something we'll talk about here. And then there are some leading physicians, in particular one at Johns Hopkins School of Medicine, who is just even completely puzzled by the CDC guidelines, which say, well, even if you have been vaccinated, even if you received even the first vaccine, much less the second one, we still need you to pretend as if you have not been vaccinated. And he then gives us some facts and figures from Israel. And, of course, we talked yesterday with our good friend, again, one of the individuals that we talked about in terms of Israel there. And we're going to get into another issue in just a minute, because the other article I've posted is by Robert Knight, and that is the war on normal and why it matters. And so those are just a few things we'll try to cover this hour. Might even get into the number of vaccine skeptics. One of the highest percentages for vaccine skeptics are frontline healthcare workers. What? Well, that you wouldn't expect that. So, again, we'll get into those issues. Next hour, Russ Vought will be with us. We'll be talking about some of the material that he has pulled together in this new organization which he has established, which is called the Center for American Restoration. He was with the Office of Management and Budget. We're going to talk about some of the political issues. We're going to talk about a piece of legislation that has been proposed as sort of an alternative to the Equality Act. And you might remember we've talked about the whole issue of the Equality Act and some of its dangers. Well, this Fairness for All Act is one he is really concerned about, so we'll spend some time talking about him and that, and then we'll get back into some of these other issues in the news, especially with the issue of, are there going to be some attempts in the Senate to dump the filibuster, which is something that has been called for by Stacey Abrams, who was an individual that ran as a Democrat for the governorship and was probably the one that was most successful in making it possible for two very liberal Democrat candidates to actually serve Georgia in the United States Senate. And so that has led to comments as well from the Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell, warning that if they did that, it would be probably a scorched earth Senate after that. And, of course, we might even talk a little bit about, when we have our national hour, what's going on in Georgia. There are a number of bills in there, both House and Senate, to deal with some of those questions that surfaced before. Will those pass, given the incredible power that people like Stacey Abrams now seem to have in Georgia? So we have a lot to talk about in the next couple of hours. And if that's not enough, 2 o'clock today, in studio, Eric Metaxas will be with us. He has his new book out, Fish Out of Water, A Search for the Meaning of Life. It's kind of makes some sense. He's written all these biographies. This one is basically an autobiography, so we'll talk with him about that, and I'm sure he's got a few other comments about some of the issues in the news, so we will get to each one of those as time allows. But let's go back to what is happening here now at the Dallas Convention Center. First article I've posted here, the federal government will use the convention center here in Dallas to hold up to 3,000 young immigrants as the Biden administration scrambles to accommodate the surge of unaccompanied minors seeking entrance to the United States at the southern border. Now, if you were to read that, you would think unaccompanied minors, 10-year-olds, 8-year-olds, maybe even 13-year-olds. No. The best estimate is that this will become a decompression center for boys, males, ages 15 to 17. And this is, of course, an attempt to put them in a nicer facility, since right now you have a tent city for over 1,000 young children outside of Midland, Texas. So that's what's going on there. You have the Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas, who has been saying that the Border Patrol facility is no place for a child. Remember when this was really controversial, when it was happening under the Trump administration? Okay. So he said, we're working in partnership with the Department of Health and Human Services to address the needs of unaccompanied children, which is made only more difficult given the protocols and restrictions required to protect the public health and health of the children themselves. They have 4,200, that's 4,200 children, which are now in some of those facilities, and the highest number ever, and it's an increase of over 1,000 children last week. They have right now more than 3,000 children being kept in what look like jail-like holding cells. They've been held there for more than 72 hours, and that actually exceeds the legal limits which are allowed. So, again, as you might have noticed, my commentary yesterday is how the Secretary of Homeland Security still says it's just a challenge, not a crisis. How bad does it have to be before we at least admonish and acknowledge it's a crisis? We'll be right back.
This is Viewpoints with Kirby Anderson.
Attacks on free speech are increasing, so much so that even liberals are concerned about people who say that free speech is dangerous and needs to be controlled. Jonathan Turley is a law professor at George Washington University, and he acknowledges that many may view him as a free speech purist, but reminds us that his views used to be mainstream for free speech. He also explains that public or private censorship does not produce better speech. It only produces more censorship and more controlled speech. That used to be the liberal view concerning free speech, but no longer. He reminds us that the Constitution was written not only for times like this, it was written during times like this. At the start of the Republic, the various factions, Republicans and Federalists, weren't just trying to cancel each other, but were actually trying to destroy and even kill each other. And there were rampant conspiracy theories back in that day. In other words, the Constitution was written in a period similar to ours today. He described some of the more extreme efforts. Last week, I talked about members of Congress who were trying to pressure various cable outlets and social media platforms to drop Fox News and any conservative commentary. An article by two law professors called for what Jonathan Turley termed Chinese-styled censorship by arguing that China's control of its media is better than the freedom we grant to networks. He concludes by assuring us that he doesn't believe that today's activists will succeed in removing the most watched cable news channel in 2020 from the airwaves. That may be true, but they may succeed in knocking off other smaller programs, and that should concern us. I'm Kirby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For a free copy of Kirby's booklet, A Biblical View on Loneliness, go to viewpoints.info/loneliness. That's viewpoints.info/loneliness.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, if you'd like to join the conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Let me, if I can, read briefly from the Dallas Morning News. And, of course, off air, many of us have been sharing various articles back and forth. I think Penna Dexter sent me one from the Washington Post. Of course, I just read the one from The Hill, this one from the Dallas Morning News. And I won't continue this because, if nothing else, we will know more about how this plays out over the next couple of weeks. But again, to quote from the Dallas Morning News, I'm into, I guess, the first major paragraph after some of the introductory material. Up to 3,000 unaccompanied immigrant teens. Okay, thank you for telling the truth. Now, to be fair, The Hill does report as you get into about the second or third paragraph that these are teens. This one is actually in the title. So 2 cheers at least for Dallas Morning News telling the truth, because when I hear children and when I heard Jen Psaki, who is the White House press secretary, talk about children, I don't know about you, but I tend to think about 8-year-olds, 9-year-olds, 10-year-olds. I don't think about 15 to 17-year-olds, many of whom I think may actually be much older than that, but we'll leave it at that. Some of them, I think, may even be part of gangs. Some of them may have been trafficked here, but we don't know, so we don't know. But again, at least give them credit for the fact that they reported that these are immigrant teens, and they will be an exhibit hall in K. Bailey Hutchison Convention Center, and it's going to be used for up to 3 months. And again, if you think that's only going to last for 3 months, again, we do have some swamp wine we'd love to sell you, just like there was a 15-day lockdown that lasted for more than a year, and I suspect they will be there for some time. And of course, what kinds of issues, fights breaking out, kids walking out, I mean, really, can we even control those individuals? The various entrances to where they will be, and let me look it up. Yeah, it's, they're in Exhibit Hall F. If you've ever been there, you know kind of where that is, off in the corner. But can they, hang out in the bathroom? Can they be involved in all sorts of activities? Is there going to be any kind of gangline fights? Just all sorts of good questions being asked here. Because, again, if you assume that they're coming here for the best of all reasons, and they are here because they just want to enjoy the American experience of having freedom to work hard and support themselves and maybe even their family back home. Okay. I think there's some other things going on that aren't in this article, and since we don't know, I won't speculate anymore, just to simply point out 3 cheers for the American Red Cross, because they are going to provide cots, blankets, hygiene items, face masks, hand sanitizer, and a couple of other necessities as early as today. And they'll also be providing health screenings for COVID-19, including temperature checks. And I hope they understand what they might actually be signing up for. So we will see. If you're not familiar, this is not the only facility in Texas, nor will it be the last that will be used by the Biden administration, who, as you read through these 2 articles here, think they are making it up as they go along. I think they don't really have any ultimate plan, because they, first of all, don't want to admit that it's anything other than just a challenge. It's not a crisis. We have a tent facility which is operated right now by the Border Patrol. That's in Donna. That has about 500 miles south of Dallas. It's holding more than 1,000 children and teenagers. So they do point out that in that case, we're not just talking teenagers. Some of these in that particular tent facility are as young as 4 years of age. Cuatro, right? You know? And they're now having various lawyers with Immigrant Services who are inspecting some of those under a court settlement, where they're going to try to interview the children and to try to find out what's going on there. Many of them are sleeping on the floor, others unable to shower, at least for the last 5 days. So there you go. I did mention the one in Midland, and that's where teenagers began arriving Sunday at this converted camp for oil field workers, where, again, volunteers from the American Red Cross are going to care for them. So this is a crisis, regardless of whether or not the administration admits it. This is getting to that point which we described under the Trump administration as a humanitarian crisis. And maybe we'll start getting the mainstream press covering it. But we've been talking about this. Do you remember last week when we started talking about, I think it was actually now been 2 weeks since we have actually first started talking about this issue. And, of course, my commentary yesterday, which I wrote more than a week ago, which aired yesterday, goes into that as well. Now, again, one of the issues is immigration is seen as, for some of us, a crisis or a challenge, but there's also been the whole issue of the vaccines. And so I didn't post this one because it just came out today, but Rich Lowry, he calls this, it's all Trump's fault. Well, of course it is. And let's be honest, every incoming administration, when something doesn't go well, blames the previous administration. George W. Bush didn't do that so much, but boy, did Barack Obama do that for Obama? Yes. Did Trump do that for Obama? Sure. I mean, so I'm not surprised that the Biden administration's blaming the Trump administration. But I love what he says. It was his misfortune to inherit one of the technological marvels of our time. What would that be? Well, that would be the vaccines, because Rich Lowry says typically it takes 10 years or more to develop a vaccine, but here were 2 vaccines against a deadly virus that took less than a year from inception to finding their way into people's arms. And he says, and yet listening to President Biden and much of his team, you'd be forgiven for thinking that Biden had to conjure the vaccines out of nowhere because the Trump administration in its callousness and incompetence chose to sit on its hands. And then he reminds us something that I thought I would remind you of before we take our break. And that is, Rich Lowry goes back into history a little bit and finds some of these different articles that were ridiculing the idea that we'd even have a vaccine by December. For example, The Hill, and again, I have very high respect for the journalistic integrity of The Hill, which is the journal of record for Capitol Hill, had a piece headlining Trump's new vaccine timeline met with deep skepticism, because they were just reporting that was the case. NBC News published an article, fact check. Coronavirus vaccine could come this year, Trump says. Expert says this would take a miracle for it to actually happen. Well, I guess the miracle took place. ABC News ran a report. Trump promises coronavirus vaccine by the end of the year, but his own experts temper expectations. And it goes on and on and on. And then, remember just a few months ago where there were many people that were really skeptical about whether or not they would take the vaccine. Then vice presidential candidate Kamala Harris said she was not sure she would take the vaccine, finally gave sort of grudging approval by saying, well, I think there's going to be an issue for all of us to take the vaccine. Now, if you raise any questions about the vaccine, I'm going to talk about that after the break, because there are being questions raised by people that are actually on the front lines, not just in the United States, but in most of the European countries, interestingly enough. Now, that's just, something that is actually a good crisis to be addressing, and it's important for Donald Trump to get out there and make a PSA to tell everybody to stick the vaccine in their arms, because it's all those Trump supporters that are actually not willing to take the vaccine. Not true, but that's kind of how it's being pitched right now. And so, of course, as he points out here, that President Biden has referred to the mess he inherited. Never mind, of course, that if it weren't for Donald Trump's Operation Warp Speed, there wouldn't even be a Moderna vaccine, or that the Trump administration had contracts for 100 million doses of the Pfizer vaccine, 100 million doses of the Moderna vaccine, and 100 million doses of the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, which were essentially paid for, even if they weren't sure that the FDA would approve them, which gave them that opportunity. And on the last day of the Trump administration, write this down sometime, because you're going to have people challenging this, or you need to remind yourself of this when you hear President Biden talk about the mess he inherited. On the very last day of the Trump administration, as, of course, Joe Biden was taking the oath of office, 1.5 million people had already been vaccinated, and that put Biden on the pace to easily achieve his goal of 100 million vaccinations in 100 days, which he's going to meet. And so let's give credit to the Biden administration for ramping up through various pressure, production, and facilitating distribution. But there were a number of things that were happening long before Joe Biden took the oath of office and before Kamala Harris became the vice president. And, of course, while we'll talk about this when we come back, I want to get into this because now testing on the COVID vaccine on very young children. See where that takes us. Some comments by a leading physician at Johns Hopkins School of Medicine, and the surprising number of individuals who are frontline workers that are saying, I don't think I'm going to take the vaccine. You're welcome to give it to someone else. As some of us like to say, what do they know that we don't know? We'll talk about some of that right after these important messages.
We live in a digital generation. Point of View is reaching this often overly plugged-in generation with truth. You can keep up with us 24 hours a day using your phone, your tablet, your laptop, or your desktop. Search for the Point of View Radio Talk Show on Facebook, where you can keep up with today's issues, learn about current and upcoming guests by liking us on Facebook. Also, follow us on Twitter. Our handle is @PointOfViewRTS. That stands for Point of View Radio Talk Show. Learn, interact, make a difference with Point of View using new media. And here's one way you can make a big difference. Help us increase our reach by spreading the word among your friends. Share a Facebook post. Tag us in a tweet. With enough joining us to plant seeds, we'll see a tremendous harvest. Come on, it only takes a minute. Search for Point of View Radio Talk Show on Facebook, @PointOfViewRTS on Twitter, and subscribe to the Point of View Radio Talk Show channel on YouTube. Learn, interact, share. The Point of View Radio Talk Show. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kirby Anderson.
Let's focus a little more time and attention on vaccines for just a minute. And I'm going to mention the name Dr. Marty Makary. And he is a professor at Johns Hopkins School of Medicine. And you might remember the name if you've got a good memory, because we talked about the fact that about a week ago, he made the prediction, which was in the Wall Street Journal, that we will probably reach what is called herd immunity by April. Well, if you look at your calendar, that's like, 40 days from now? And he's like, yes, I think that's exactly what I'm saying. When that was quoted in the Wall Street Journal, well, then, of course, you had some of the fact checkers going out there saying, no, we can't possibly agree with his conclusions, even though, as one person put it, those who have disputed that have nowhere near the level of expertise when it comes to public health that he does. And I think there may be an explanation why there was pushback to what he said then, so why there'll be pushback for what I'm going to talk about now. And the best way to understand it is to remember this time last year when actually I went out of my way to get Jay Richards, Dr. Jay Richards on the program to argue that actually masks probably do help when you're dealing with a respiratory infection. Why did I feel that I needed to get him on? Is because I'd heard both the head of the CDC and the Surgeon General say, don't buy masks, they won't do you any good. Do you remember that? And then after the fact, of course, we had Anthony Fauci and Jerome, what's his last name, at the Surgeon General and some of the others, saying, well, we just said that because we were afraid that if we told people that they could have masks, they would go out and buy out all the masks, and we wouldn't have enough for those frontline workers. Oh, so we made sure that we told, can we call it a lie, an exaggeration, an untruth, whatever you want to call it, because we didn't want to tell you the truth. And I think the same thing's going on here. If you actually agree that we might actually reach herd immunity by April, there's a fear. I think it's legitimate, but it's a fear that some people say, well, then it's certainly not going to get the vaccine. If we've already reached herd immunity, why do I need to get the vaccine? And you can see why that might be the case. Well, if nothing else, it brings us back to Marty Makary, because he was the one, of course, that suggested that we might have herd immunity by April. And then he goes on to talk about some other things. But first of all, let me make the case. Whether you agree with him or not, his argument, which I think makes pretty good sense, is that if you start looking at the population fatality rate and then look at the COVID-19 infection fatality rate and do some comparisons, then you can actually estimate that maybe 2/3 of the country have already had an infection, which is amazing. That's a higher percentage than anybody would use. But factor into that the fact that you also have 100 million people that will be vaccinated. Now, that one you can't challenge because that's the one that was put forward by President Biden. He wanted to have 100 million people inoculated in the first 100 days, and he's going to meet that. And again, credit to the Biden administration, credit to all the individuals that were what he calls vaccinators. That is the case. So, again, he also points out that the hesitancy on the part of the CDC is, well, you really need 2 doses, not 1. And again, Dr. Marty Makary, who again, Johns Hopkins School of Medicine, cites a study from Israel. Remember, we had Joe Rosenberg on just the other day, in which they found that those who had been given the Pfizer vaccine were essentially bulletproof 4 weeks after the first dose. You know, I've pointed out that some places, like in the UK, they are just making sure everybody gets the first dose, and then they'll come back and try to get the second one because they found that that is the case. So, interestingly enough, if you just had the first vaccine, in a sense, you could possibly go back to business as usual, back to normal. I'm going to challenge the word normal in just a minute. That's one of our other articles. But then he goes on to even talk about the fact that the CDC won't even allow people that have had both of the doses of the vaccine to go back to normal. And this is what he says. He says parts of the new guideline are absurdly restrictive. For example, the CDC didn't withdraw its advice to avoid air travel after vaccination. A year of pre-vaccination experience, he says, has demonstrated that airplanes are not a source of spread. The study conducted for the Defense Department found that commercial airplanes have a HEPA filtration and airflow that exceeds the standards of a hospital operating room. I can use a couple of examples, but the one that comes to mind is, you know, that oftentimes we have on Friday Kelly Shackelford. We don't have Kelly Shackelford here because he's been on a lot of airplanes over this last year. And he still doesn't have COVID-19. Okay. And then, of course, he goes into all the other issues that they've learned from the Israeli health ministry and the rest, but I won't go into all that. But then simply at the end talks about the fact that when you keep these lockdowns in place, then you have what he talks about, the mental health issues that have exploded during the lockdown and all the things that have been happening in that regard. And so in some respects, I think Marty Makary is onto something, but you aren't going to get a lot of people possibly agreeing with him because of the fear. I understand it. I think it may be somewhat even legitimate fear, although maybe overblown, that if indeed all of a sudden people hear we have herd immunity by tax time, then all of a sudden nobody else is going to take a vaccine. And perhaps that's another explanation for now this article I have in front of me, because Lawrence Solomon, writing, says, what do frontline health workers and first responders know about COVID-19 vaccines that politicians and public health advisors don't? And then just reminds us, as we talked about back in January, that there was a poll done by Gallup. And Gallup at the time was surprised that they found in their poll that was done in December, which they released in January, that they found that 51% of healthcare workers and first responders were not going to get the vaccine. The percentages now have gone a little differently as more and more people have. But it is interesting. I mean, think about this. You have Presidents Carter and Bush and Clinton and Obama and their wives doing a PSA telling people to actually get the vaccine. You've heard interviews we've done even on this program of people saying it's safe. It's an mRNA vaccine, very different than the other vaccines. And yet, what are you finding? A lot of people are simply not going to get the vaccine who are frontline workers. Do you need some examples? Well, here's a couple. In California, half of one county's hospital workers in St. Elizabeth Community Hospital actually decided that they would not get that. An estimated 50% of them right there in Riverside County. Another 20 to 40% in Los Angeles County have refused the vaccine. Let's go to Georgia. Atlanta Journal-Constitution reported that only 30% of healthcare workers in Georgia, where they were doing this survey, had been inoculated. Okay, let's go to Ohio, because we broadcast there. Governor Mike DeWine reported that 60% of nursing home workers refused the vaccine in the Buckeye State. How about Texas? Well, the Texas Tribune reported in February that health, home, and assisted living agencies were not able to service their clients because so many of their caregivers were refusing vaccinations. Well, is this due just to Americans or MAGA supporters or Trump supporters? Well, let's go overseas, okay? Reuters reported that almost half of the nursing staff in Switzerland's medical sector actually were not going to take the vaccine. Only 30% of the staff in Germany's group care home actually were going to take the vaccine. And about half of the workers in the French care homes were willing to be vaccinated. Okay, let's go to public broadcasting. PBS reported that in India, they've started administering the second dose of the vaccine 2 weeks ago because they have so many extra vaccines. Half of the frontline workers and nearly 40% of healthcare workers did not show up to get the vaccine. Yeah. It goes on and on. Let me go back to some of the others. Many of the frontline workers see maybe firsthand some of those who get sick or they die after receiving the vaccine. You have 23 nursing home deaths in Norway, hundreds of hospitalizations in Israel. And if you have not been paying attention, and I have, AstraZeneca, the vaccine there, is facing such resistance that now many of them are not taking the vaccine, and there are starting to be some countries in Europe that are questioning whether they will continue to distribute that as well. So that's kind of what we know about vaccines. On the one hand, a lot of people say it's safe, you should take it, and it's your civic duty. And then we find a lot of people are saying, no mas, I won't take it, we'll do something else. Let's take a break, though. I've been mentioning the word normal, and a very good piece that we've posted here by our friend Robert Knight, The War on Normal and Why It Matters. At first, you have to be rolling your eyes, but then you realize how it fits into the broader cultural battle we're facing, and we'll talk about that right after this.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back for a few more minutes, let me just mention that we're going to have Russ Vogt with us. And again, an individual that joined the Office of Management and Budget under the Trump administration, and an individual that is now the head of the Center for American Restoration. I think you're going to find that very helpful. And in a minute, I'll also mention my commentary today on attacks on free speech, but in some respects, it fits very well with the other article that I've posted here today by Robert Knight. By the way, I've posted another one about China cannot feed itself, so we'll talk about China maybe in the national hour, but but let me come back to this war on normal and why it matters. Robert Knight's been with us so many times before. Of course, we oftentimes interview him as we talk about our truth team, but he points out something that I had not heard, and that is the word normal is actually under attack. You know, you talk about the cancel culture. How in the world could the word normal be under attack? Well, he says, no more soap for normal skin care or shampoo for normal hair because that's offensive. A study by Unilever found that the word normal made some of the respondents feel excluded, and a very high percentage of them felt that using the word on packaging had a negative impact on people. Now, if you're advertising, understand you're going to pick out things that are not going to be off-putting, but I wonder who these people are. If I go in and buy shampoo and I see that it's for dry hair, normal hair, and oily hair, and I have oily hair, I put that and take that because I appreciate the fact that maybe my skin, for example, was more oily than someone else's. And I really don't feel offended because you said it's normal. And normal skin care or oily skin or dry skin, I mean, just think this through. But nevertheless, Unilever has 400 brands in 190 countries, and it claims 2.5 billion customers. So, you've got Dove, and you've got Brute, and you got Lifebuoy, and Axe, and you got Food, Pure Leaf Tea, and Lipton Tea, and Breyers, and Continental, and Hellmann's, and I mean, you just go on and on and on. And you just say, what happened to Unilever that they would even think about this? Well, Robert Knight has an idea. That is, they acquired recently Ben & Jerry's. And if you're familiar with Ben & Jerry's up there in Vermont, of course, this is going to be kind of the idea of the woke. And all it takes is a couple of woke people to begin to say, you know what, we need to change the word normal. And so, of course, Robert Knight goes into all the other examples that we have seen. Matter of fact, he probably leaves out some that I thought of. But, for example, he talks about in January, Disney decided to remove these particular ones from the Disney Plus account. So here's some of the cartoons and various films that Disney no longer makes available on Disney Plus. That would be Dumbo, Peter Pan, Aristocats, Lady and the Tramp, Jungle Book, and Swiss Family Robinson, to mention just a couple that just got axed by Disney in January. Well, then in February, you know what happened. We have Dr. Seuss, and of course you have a school board that announced it was removing 6 of those books because they didn't like some of the so-called racial undertones. As I pointed out before, one of those that they wanted to get rid of actually, I think, encourages people not to take on this idea of supremacy, whether it's white supremacy, class supremacy, whatever. But nevertheless, that's it. And so they actually said they would not feature him on Read Across America Day, which is always on the author's birthday. And so then, of course, very quickly, the publisher pulled, and to think I saw it on Mulberry Street, if I ran the zoo, Miguel Elliott's pool, on Beyond Zebra, Scrambled Egg Super, and the Cat's Quizzard. And, of course, then the proclamation that was read by Joe Biden obediently omitted Dr. Seuss, even though Donald Trump and Barack Obama had mentioned it. As a matter of fact, I think every president before that did. And, of course, you have all sorts of other ones that he didn't mention. I thought of course, Potato Head. Not Mr. Potato Head or Miss, but just gender-neutral Potato Head and all of that. But then also in February, he pointed out something else that I have yet to mention. February, of course, is Black History Month, and we spent some time talking about that. And so what would Amazon do during Black History Month? Remove one of the most popular documentaries of one of the most prominent African Americans in the judiciary. That would be Clarence Thomas. And so this very popular Created Equal Clarence Thomas in his own words is a film that was actually aired on public broadcasting in May. It was then streaming on the Prime membership there, and it was one of the top streaming documentaries and selling very well. Matter of fact, the Wall Street Journal at one point pointed out that it was number one under the documentaries. Even when the film was being attacked, it still was like number 25, according to Jason Riley. Rotten Tomatoes give the film a 99% audience approval rating, but nevertheless, Amazon pulled that documentary while they still have the documentary up there for Anita Hill, the accuser of Clarence Thomas back in 1991. And of course, you know some of the others. Of course, in February, Lucasfilm decided that they're going to send Gina Carano by. She was, of course, one of the principals in The Mandalorian. Then in March, you have the Gannett newspaper that decided to pull the comic strip permanently, Mallard Fillmore, because even though they had been carrying it for 27 years, the humorist at one point in an interview in the Washington Times criticized the transgender agenda because he didn't think it was fair for biological males who claimed to be females participating in women's sports. So, not that I ever really looked at the cartoon strip, but it got pulled for that reason. And it brings us back to the whole question of normal. As Robert Knight says, you know, we're living in a culture where men dressed up in dresses performing drag queen story hour for small children must be protected, while we need to protect or must be given the opportunity, while we must protect those same children from exposure to Dr. Seuss. Or as Tucker Carlson used the other day, we have to protect them from Dr. Seuss. Well, if they turned on the television the other night and saw the Grammy Awards, he showed one of the scenes. He said it was the least offensive one. I thought, if that's the least offensive one, oh, goodness, what we are dealing with in our culture, where the word normal isn't really allowed, and it really isn't normal anyway. Well, as we take a break, let's, if we can, talk about the fact that my commentary today is called Attacks on Free Speech. And it's always important, I think, when we can find somebody who maybe wouldn't agree with some of the things we talk about around the table, nevertheless is making our point. And that comes from Jonathan Turley, who is a law professor at George Washington University, who calls himself a liberal, probably voted for Hillary Clinton, most likely voted for Joe Biden, but at the same time is very concerned about the attempt to censor free speech, and reminds us that the Constitution was written not only for times like these, it was written during times like these. You know, back at the start of the Republic, people weren't just trying to cancel you. They, in some cases, were trying to destroy you. Some were even trying to kill you. And so in the midst of that, there was an understanding that free speech needs to stand strong, and the best way to rid yourself of false speech or incorrect speech or evil speech is to have more speech. And that is certainly the case. Did they have conspiracy theories back then? Oh, my goodness. They would rot your socks if you were to read some of those. And so don't tell me today that we have to purge anybody that is engaged in anything that looks like a conspiracy theory, because, after all, the reason we had free speech is to be able to answer the questions rather than to simply cancel them. So anyway, it's a good piece. Thought you'd like to read it. Russ Vogt will be with us, and then an hour from now, we'll have Eric Metaxas in studio. We have a lot to look forward to, and we'll be back right after this.
Sometimes I think about seeds. You ever stop to consider that some seeds become entire trees, and some trees grow up and produce fruit? Other seeds become flowers or vines that bring us vegetables or berries. And some trees don't have fruit, but they're just pretty, especially in some parts of the country when it comes to the fall colors. Yes, sometimes my mind goes off like that. And I also think about such things when it comes to the seeds that so many have planted in the quest to impact our nation through Point of View Radio. You may think that your gift is a small thing, but like a seed, it can grow to have an impact beyond your imagination. If you want to see beauty again in America, consider planting a seed today and making a difference by joining the Point of View Truth Team. Get the details today, right now, by visiting pointofview.net/team or call us at 1-800-347-2727. 5151. Plant a seed for a great future. Cultivate truth. pointofview.net/team and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kirby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kirby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kirby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me. It is the Tuesday edition of Point of View, and this hour we're going to spend some time for a few minutes talking with Russ Vought, who's been with us before, an individual that was, of course, with the Office of Management and Budget and was the director of the OMB. We'll get into that more in just a minute. Matter of fact, I've posted one article that you can read in which he has raised very good questions about the Fairness for All Act, because we have been talking about the Equality Act, and I wanted you to know about that. But we'll also talk about this idea of hegemony. You might even remember last time we had him on, we talked about this very good piece that I still have here in front of me, How to Lead the United States into an American Spring. Also have one here from the Washington Post, Conservative Populism Might Finally Be Getting the Intellectual Heft It Needs. So lots of ways you can find out more about him and the Center for American Restoration. Then after he leaves, we'll spend just a little bit of time looking at the issue of immigration and the vaccines and a number of other things, a crisis at the border, which the administration doesn't want to admit is a crisis, and we'll talk about that. And then next hour in studio with us will be Eric Metaxas, as we'll be talking about his new book, Fish Out of Water, and I'm sure he'll have some comments about some of the political issues we are discussing every day here on Point of View. Russ Vought is an individual that graduated from Wheaton College, has his law degree from George Washington University, and is the head of the Center for American Restoration. So, Russ, welcome back to Point of View.
Thanks for having me on.
Let's, if we can, for just a minute, get to one issue. We've been encouraging people on this program to contact their two senators about the For the People Act, but before that, we also encourage them to contact their senators about the Equality Act. And I think almost everybody understands the great danger that would be to religious liberty and much more. But of course, you have written about the fact and expressed your concern about what is called the Fairness for All Act. A representative out of Utah has put that together. And yet, as some people might have thought, well, that would be kind of a good conservative answer to the Equality Act, you've expressed some concerns. Can you help us out with that?
For sure. My concern is that it is an attempt to reach a compromise in the cultural wars with sexual progressive ideology. But by focusing on religious liberty alone, it concedes far too much. And my concern is that it's fundamentally untrue in how it treats human nature, that men and women are different biological sexes. But also, it's not just people of faith that need to have laws that accord with reality. And my concern is that we don't need an entire society that is fumbling when it comes to the reality of needing to have women's sports, of female-only spaces, of clarity when it comes to the rights of conscience as it pertains to medical professionals and hospitals who don't want to perform gender identity transitions. So you go down the list of the practical issues that a concession of this magnitude means for a society. And it's something I have great concern about. And the concern is, if the Equality Act continues to be thwarted in the Senate, and I think that there's a good chance of that as a result of the filibuster. As people watch the filibuster, that'll be the domino effect. But what I don't want to happen is, as the left calls for action in this space, that they turn their attention to a bill that has 20 Republican members of support on it, some of them who are fairly conservative, And so that is my warning in that letter. And what my hope is that members get their names off that bill so that is not a temptation for the left.
And I might just mention that we've posted that. It comes from the American Spectator, but you can actually see the letter. You can also see some of the commentary there as well, and even the names of some of those individuals that have signed it. So we wanted that to be there and for you to know that it exists, and it's one of the articles we posted here on the website. And of course, we also have information about your website because I want as many people as possible to find out more about the Center for American Restoration. After you were on last time, I signed up to receive some of that material, and so I'm not asking someone to do something I haven't done, because I think you are really trying to, as somebody said, try to provide some intellectual heft to some of those issues. One of those we wanted to talk about is this idea of hegemony, and how do we kind of think our way through that? It's a kind of a big word, but it's been tossed around a little bit. And at the same time, having worked in the Trump administration, having thought about public policy and those kinds of things, obviously you can give us some direction on what that might mean and why we might accept or reject certain aspects of that. Can you help us out?
I can take a stab at it, Kirby. And typically, hegemony is a negative word. It's one of the things that we talk about with regard to what we in the rise of China, or we want to prevent secular hegemony in our society. And so this is something that, a center like ours is trying to draw attention to, because we have long had a view of Judeo-Christian worldview as being the underlying basis of our society. And our critics will be on the other side and say, well, that's really just Christian hegemony. And really, sometimes our critics can't get their story straight. We're either not a Christian nation in which there's really no evidence of a Judeo-Christian worldview that undergirds us or our society, or in fact, it's Christian domination at every turn. And the reason why I think it's a little bit of a negative is the reality that all we're asking for is Christian influence in our society based on the historic norms of that. We're not asking for domination. We're not asking for anything other than for religion, and in this case, the Christian worldview, to be an influence in society and allow many different people of faith to be able to worship freely in this country, but also to have the benefits of a worldview that locates our rights under God and also our duties. And as a result, there are implications for our communities and how healthy they are and people's ability to live and flourish.
Well, and again, we've talked about this idea of what is in the public square, all the way back to a very famous book called The Naked Public Square. But if I can quote you, you talk about the fact that here God is excluded and faith has become predominantly a private matter. Talked about that with Os Guinness and others. And it is no longer acceptable for conservatives to argue as citizens or elected officials from a Judeo-Christian worldview. And the kind of argument that is oftentimes made is, well, that's just inappropriate, or it's calling for, as you said, some extreme theocracy, which I don't know anybody that is a Christian who's involved in the political process calling for a theocracy, but they are asking for an equal place at the table, aren't they?
Yeah, that's all that we're asking for people of faith, is the ability to participate in the process and to be able to affect change. And sometimes you read in the literature, and I've been working through some of this reading over the weekend, is the real concern on many on the left is that not only do we have a specific worldview, but we actually want to have that worldview implemented into public policy because we think it has an impact on communities and families and neighborhoods. The other side doesn't want that. They want it to be entirely private, and they don't get to define what private means. It's a private thing. It's not the practice of your faith. And so you see in an example like the Fairness for All Act or the Equality Act, if there's an effort to define religion, well, that must be just private. It shouldn't impact the public space.
Let's take a break. We'll continue our conversation with Russ Vought. And again, you can find out more about the Center for American Restoration, which is on our website, pointofview.net. We'll be right back.
This is Viewpoints with Kirby Anderson.
Attacks on free speech are increasing, so much so that even liberals are concerned about people who say that free speech is dangerous and needs to be controlled. Jonathan Turley is a law professor at George Washington University, and he acknowledges that many may view him as a free speech purist, but reminds us that his views used to be mainstream for free speech. He also explains that public or private censorship does not produce better speech. It only produces more censorship and more controlled speech. That used to be the liberal view concerning free speech, but no longer. He reminds us that the Constitution was written not only for times like this, it was written during times like this. At the start of the Republic, the various factions, Republicans and Federalists, weren't just trying to cancel each other, but were actually trying to destroy and even kill each other. And there were rampant conspiracy theories back in that day. In other words, the Constitution was written in a period similar to ours today. He described some of the more extreme efforts. Last week, I talked about members of Congress who were trying to pressure various cable outlets and social media platforms to drop Fox News and any conservative commentary. An article by 2 law professors called for what Jonathan Turley termed Chinese-styled censorship by arguing that China's control of its media is better than the freedom we grant to networks. He concludes by assuring us that he doesn't believe that today's activists will succeed in removing the most watched cable news channel in 2020 from the airwaves. That may be true, but they may succeed in knocking off other smaller programs, and that should concern us. I'm Kirby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For a free copy of Kirby's booklet, A Biblical View on Loneliness, go to viewpoints.info/loneliness. That's viewpoints.info/loneliness.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Begin a conversation today with Russ Vought as we talk about his involvement, of course, as the established president of the Center for American Restoration. If you'd like to know more, that's on our website, pointofview.net. And Russ, you know, I write my commentaries a week ahead of time, so I didn't know that this was the one that I just had aired on our program actually would fit very well, because I'm quoting from an individual, Jonathan Turley, who I know you know, a law professor at George Washington University. Of course, you have a law degree from George Washington University Law School. And even though he would probably disagree with a lot of things we would be talking about today and a lot of things we discuss around this table, he's expressing the same concern that you and I and so many of our guests on this program express, and that is the argument that we should actually be monitoring speech. And I love one of his lines. The Constitution was written not only for times like these, it was written during times like these. You had conspiracy theories. You had people not just trying to cancel each other, but sometimes trying to destroy each other. And we've always had kind of the assumption that if you don't like certain kind of speech, or you think certain speech is erroneous or even evil, the best antidote is more speech, and to actually address that. And it sort of gets us back to this idea of Christian hegemony a little bit, because if you exclude Christian voices, if you exclude conservative commentary, and you only allow one view, then it becomes real easy to say there is only one view and there isn't an alternative, and that's not the best way to form public policy, is it?
No, it's not. Our system works best is when we have many different voices participating in the public policy arena. And, I respect my old professor Turley a great deal. And one of the things I've always admired about him is that he's fair. He's not necessarily an ideologue who's trying to ensure that the voice that he disagrees with has no access to the public square. And I think that's the approach that we have always taken as Americans, and something that we need to maintain in these difficult times as we're trying to fight for the voice of many of us to stay in the conversation when people like the big tech companies are trying to turn us off, and the secular media doesn't want to hear from us. These are all really important times that we need to be able to participate.
Isn't it kind of interesting that I find myself more and more quoting Jonathan Turley on a fairly regular basis, and Glenn Greenwald, and Alan Dershowitz has been on the program with us a couple of times, and a number of others who really on the kind of Christian worldview issues that you and I hold dear and talk about, they would probably disagree with us on that, but I find that they are wanting to push back against leftism because they are, I think, in some respects recognizing that the original liberal vision that I defend your right to say whatever you might, even though I might disagree with that, is pretty much eroding away. And that kind of gets us back to this idea of wanting to have Christian voice at the table and wanting to not exclude voices, but include as many as possible, because that's the best way to form public policy.
Absolutely. I think they're concerned about the increasing illiberalism that we're seeing, the repressive tolerance. If you have to modify tolerance, you're probably going down the wrong road. That we're seeing not just in society, but for many of us that were going through the confirmation process, we faced new questions just by virtue of the fact of what we believed and what we practiced in our faith. And if that increases over time, we are going to find ourselves in an increasingly secular environment where Christians are flat out excluded and discriminated against.
Let's, if we can, just while we have a few minutes, talk about what is available at the Center for American Restoration, because I think there are people, Russ, that are saying, okay, I want to exercise my Christian views. I know that I'm not probably going to hear that in the mainstream media. I'm concerned about the fact that sometimes even very intelligent and articulate people are being, if in one way, blocked or even removed from social media. So one of the things you've wanted to try to do is provide a place which actually focuses on some of these very important issues of populism and hegemony, and really trying to help people begin to think about how to apply a Christian world and life view to some of these policy issues. So talk about what people will find when they land on your website, and what is kind of the vision that you have for the future.
Sure, and I appreciate that. If they go to AmericanRestorationCenter.com, they will find our landing page while our main website is under construction. But if they sign up, they'll get updates from us and track with our organization as we scale up. And we're getting people involved in the political process. We're getting them informed about the issues, and we're giving them venues. This Fairness for All Act is the first of those opportunities. HR 1 is another, to be able to participate. And that will only increase in the weeks, months, and years ahead, Lord willing. And so this is an area where we'd love for people to track with us. They can also find me on Twitter at @RussVote.
Yes, as a matter of fact, we even have that posted there. Yeah.
Is know, grow, and go. Know your issues, grow your networks and skill sets, and go out there and lead.
Before I let you go, I would be remiss if I didn't talk to the former director of Office of Management and Budget to get your thoughts for just a minute about a $1.9 trillion expense that the federal government placed upon itself. I mean, we've spent, I think it's $4 to $6 trillion already, but at least some of these other packages were bipartisan. You don't have one Democrat that strayed from the fold in the Senate and only one that strayed in the House. And so this was not bipartisan, number one. But number two, You've looked at budgets for a long time, and I'm sure are as concerned as many people about the growing national debt. Can you help us understand what you see in the future? Because now we're hearing not only do they want to come up with a way to spend more money on infrastructure, but now there's all sorts of talk about trying to raise taxes or to remove some of the tax cuts that were provided under the Trump administration. And I imagine you probably have some thoughts about this as well.
I do. There's tremendous fiscal storm clouds on the horizon, and we can't afford it from the standpoint of where we are as a national debt. Another $2 trillion expense, and if you look underneath the details, it's only 9% of it is COVID relief, and a lot of it goes to schools. $110 billion when they haven't spent the first $100 billion. That spends $350 billion bailing out blue states that have mismanaged their states for decades. So it's just a bad bill, and it's wasteful. People across the political spectrum are saying that, and we've got to use every opportunity we can to get the country back going in the right place. And we can't afford to just waste it with these big numbers just so that the Democrats can have a political win.
So again, some great opportunities. Yeah. If nothing else, just again, you keep cutting out, so sorry about that, but we'll solve that maybe next time. But if nothing else, I wanted people to know a little bit more about the Center for American Restoration, and we have that link on our website, pointofview.net, and we've also posted the piece there about the Fairness for All Act, and also some other links to your various social media contacts as well as your webpage. So thank you so very much for joining us today here on Point of View.
Thanks, Kirby.
We're going to take a break, and when we come back, we'll get into some of those issues. Apologize for that. I suspect probably has call waiting, and it kept cutting him out. And I didn't mean to interrupt him a couple of times, but when there's dead air, you always try to jump in. So we'll see if we can solve that in the future. And we wanted you to know more about the Center for American Restoration. Eric Metaxas will be with us at the top of the hour, but when we come back, I want to get into a couple of issues. First of all, of course, the issue of immigration. The crisis at the border that the administration won't admit is a crisis. Those of us in the state of Texas right now, and I'm broadcasting from Dallas, just down the road from us here, they're going to put 3,000 15 to 17-year-olds in the Dallas Convention Center. Oh, that's probably not going to go well. We have thousands others all over the state of Texas and Midland and a variety of other places. So we'll get into that, but also want to get into the whole question of the virus and the vaccines and a few of those issues. And so we will get into some of those topics, and you can certainly find some of that on our website, pointofview.net. We'll talk about the war on normal before we finish off this hour, because indeed that's a very important commentary by Robert Knight, so we'll talk about that as well. But if you find yourself saying, you're maybe helping me understand what's going on in our society and giving me some talking points, some action items, and the rest, I hope that you'll look at the banner that we have up right now at Point of View, because it talks about the fact that we're really facing a crisis of truth. You're probably hearing some things even today, and will be hearing some things today you probably will hear nowhere else. And so if you value the news, information, and commentary that we make available to you here at Point of View, I want you to begin to think about the fact that we are certainly standing for truth. Next week will be our Truth Team Week, and we'll be hearing from all sorts of experts in that regard. But there's an opportunity for you to join with us, and I hope you'll click on that banner that says Give Now and support this ministry. Let's take a break. We'll get back to vaccines, immigration, and much more right after this.
We live in a digital generation. Point of View is reaching this often overly plugged-in generation with truth. You can keep up with us 24 hours a day using your phone, your tablet, your laptop, or your desktop. Search for the Point of View Radio Talk Show on Facebook, where you can keep up with today's issues, learn about current and upcoming guests by liking us on Facebook. Also, follow us on Twitter. Our handle is @PointOfViewRTS. That stands for Point of View Radio Talk Show. Learn, interact, make a difference with Point of View using new media. And here's one way you can make a big difference. Help us increase our reach by spreading the word among your friends. Share a Facebook post. Tag us in a tweet. With enough joining us to plant seeds, we'll see a tremendous harvest. Come on, it only takes a minute. Search for Point of View Radio Talk Show on Facebook, at Point of View RTS on Twitter, and subscribe to the Point of View Radio Talk Show channel on YouTube. Learn, interact, share. The Point of View Radio Talk Show. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again, is Kirby Anderson.
Back once again, if you'd like to join the conversation, 1-800-351-1212. So often we've encouraged you to make your particular opinion known about many of these issues. We just talked a few minutes ago with Russ Vought about the Equality Act. Right now we have on our Take Action item For the People Act, and that's the one on the issue of the election. And there is a very significant challenge that is now before the United States Senate, because on many of these issues, whether it's the Equality Act, the For the People Act, whether it's the issue of comprehensive immigration, the gun control bills that were just passed out of the House, none of them are going anywhere if you have to have 60 votes to break a filibuster. But there are a number of individuals, in particular Stacey Abrams. Many of you in the state of Georgia know who she is, former Democratic candidate for governor, and an individual that I think orchestrated two successful elections of very liberal candidates to the United States Senate from Georgia. And so because of that call just the other day, the Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell actually warned the Democrats that doing away with the chamber's filibuster rule would lead to a completely scorched earth Senate, in which the Democratic President Joe Biden would have a much harder time moving his agenda. So there is somewhat of a drumbeat right now simply saying we need to get rid of the filibuster, which requires 60 votes to pass legislation in the 100-seat chamber. And so that's a big issue right now. And while we're talking about Georgia, a lot of people are saying, well, are we seeing any changes taking place in various states? And I've been keeping track of those in various states, but I thought just since you might wonder about Georgia, which is one of those states which certainly candidate at that time, Donald Trump, of course, President Donald Trump was expecting to win. And I've looked at the list here. In Georgia right now, you have House and Senate both considering a number of election integrity bills, HB 531 and Senate Bill 241, which would do such things as, verify the accuracy of voter rolls, to ban private funding of elections, to limit absentee voting, and make the absentee process more secure with voter ID, and a number of other issues. And this is happening, of course, not only in Georgia, but in Pennsylvania and Wisconsin and Michigan and a number of other places. And so even though we're a national program, from time to time I like to just mention that some things are happening at these state legislatures and need to happen before the next election. But of course, the biggest threat, which we've talked about on this program many times before, is simply what happens if there is no longer a filibuster. Then some of this most radical legislation that has passed through the House of Representatives could be enacted in the Senate, and there's every reason to believe, of course, President Biden would sign it. So those are some important issues that certainly we need to talk about. Well, I'm talking about President Biden. Let me point out the fact that there has been a tendency, as happens in other administrations, to blame your predecessor. And, of course, the line that went out this weekend at all the talking head shows, and Gary Bauer did a very good piece talking about all of these, but even Rich Lauer today has the title, "It's Trump's Fault." Whenever there's a problem with the vaccine distribution at the border, which I think is a crisis, my commentary yesterday certainly documented that, then always we blame the previous administration. Well, Rich Lauer had some fun. He said, well, it's his misfortune to have inherited one of the great technological marvels of our time. And what he's talking about is the fact that even before he took office, there were 1.5 million people that were vaccinated. And Rich Lauer reminds us that it usually takes about 10 years or more to develop a vaccine. Here you had 2 vaccines against the deadly virus. And yet, to listening to President Biden and much of his administration, you'd be forgiving for thinking that President Biden had to conjure the vaccines out of nowhere because the Trump administration just sat on its hands, which, of course, is not true. Matter of fact, he spends a little bit of time reminding us, interestingly enough, of all these headlines. The Hill, Trump's new vaccine timeline met with deep skepticism. NBC News, fact check, coronavirus vaccine could come this year, Trump says. Experts say he needs a miracle. for that to happen. ABC News, Trump promises coronavirus vaccine by end of the year, but his own experts temper expectations. But, of course, here we are. All those vaccines have arrived. And to hear the current president talk about the previous president as the mess he inherited, not so much. And not only was it Operation Warp Speed that produced them in record time, but also the decision by the Trump administration to pay for what could or could not have been approved by the FDA. 100 million doses of the Pfizer vaccine, 100 million doses of the Moderna vaccine, 100 million doses of Johnson & Johnson, so that on the last day Trump took office, and it might be worth writing this down, just about the time Joe Biden's going to take the oath of office, 1.5 million people were already vaccinated, and everything was being ramped up so that the goal that President Biden has had of 100 million people vaccinated in the first 100 days will probably happen. So can we give credit to the Trump administration? Sure. Should we give credit to the Biden administration that has ramped up production and facilitation and getting vaccinators? Yes. Okay. So that's, I think, fair. And yet fairness has not exactly been what has been done so far. And that brings me to some of the real questions now that have surfaced about the vaccinations. And I want to use a good example of that from Dr. Marty Makary. He is a professor at Johns Hopkins School of Medicine. If you have a really good memory, you might remember that I mentioned his name last week because he's the one who, in a Wall Street Journal a week ago, actually estimated that he thought it would be possible that we would have herd immunity by April. And, of course, I talked about how there were people fact-checking it and everything. And, of course, a lot of people pointed out that the people that disputed what he said have nowhere near the level of expertise that he has in terms of public health. And his argument, by looking at the population fatality rate and the COVID-19 infection rate, was that maybe 2/3 of the country has already had the infection. And you add to that 100 million vaccines we just talked about, and you're on your way. And, of course, he also points out a study out of Israel. We had Joel Rosenberg on yesterday, you might remember, in which looking at the Pfizer vaccine, recognized that even after people got the first dose, within about 4 weeks, they were bulletproof. They were able to fend off the COVID-19 virus. So that is part of it. And then he goes on in the most recent statement, Dr. Marty Makary, by saying that he was really concerned about the CDC guidelines because he said part of the new guidelines, he says, are absurdly restrictive. For example, the CDC didn't withdraw its advice to avoid air travel after vaccination. Yet he said a year of pre-vaccination experience has demonstrated that airplanes aren't a source of spread. A study conducted for the Defense Department found that commercial airlines have a HEPA filtration and airflow that exceeds the standards even of a hospital operating room. So he has expressed some of his concern. And I think some of the reason there has been such a pushback to his comments or the fact that maybe some are fearful of the fact that by saying that we could be at herd immunity by April, which is next month, or even if you say by the end of the month, that's 40 days from now, a lot of people might not get the vaccine. And I think that illustrates, again, something we've seen before. Remember at this time last year where I even took the time to get Dr. Jay Richards on this program, who had done some research on the idea that actually masks probably do help when you're dealing with a respiratory disease. And yet we're having Anthony Fauci and you're having the Surgeon General and a number of others say, no, don't get masks. They don't help. And then they admitted later they said that because they didn't want people to buy masks and not have them available for the hospital workers. And so they admitted that they sort of lied about that. I think the pushback right now is, no, don't tell people we might have herd immunity by April because people might not then want to actually go and get the vaccine. But I'll talk about this after the break because what we're starting to see now is the growing evidence of the number of individuals who are frontline or first responders or healthcare workers who aren't going to get the vaccine. And we back in January talked about this survey done of the Gallup poll in which in December, and it was released in January, found that 51% of healthcare workers and first responders were not necessarily convinced they were going to get the vaccine. The percentage has changed a little bit, but when we come back from the break, I want to kind of hopscotch around the country and talk about some of the facts and figures that show that a lot of individuals, either healthcare workers or first responders, are not getting the vaccine. And then we'll end with our piece by Robert Knight about this war on normal. It is one of the commentaries we've posted. And of course, we also posted one about China, which we might have a chance to get to later. But those are all coming up right after these important messages.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, and again, if you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Eric Metaxas will be in studio at the top of the hour, and perhaps you have a question for him, and we'll be talking about his book, Fish Out of Water, A Search for the Meaning of Life. Individual that has, of course, done a number of biographies, so I guess it makes sense he would do an autobiography, and so we'll learn a little bit more about him, and I'm sure he's got a few comments about things that are taking place. But again, I mentioned just a minute ago, Dr. Marty Makary was actually talking about the fact that we might reach much herd immunity might be another reason why individuals who were thinking of getting the vaccine won't. But again, many have been very critical of his estimates, and maybe part of it because they think his numbers don't work, or maybe just because they're just a little concerned at what would happen if indeed we had that. But even apart from that issue, I thought I'd just mention in passing that we have so much evidence that is now beginning to come in that a lot of healthcare workers and first responders are not getting the vaccine. Let's pick California, where we broadcast. We have some here, for example, in Riverside County. Estimated almost 50% of the frontline workers there are not getting the vaccine. 20 to 40% in Los Angeles County, at least according to the Los Angeles Times, have refused the vaccine. Let's go to Georgia. I just mentioned that a minute ago. Atlanta Journal-Constitution, in their survey, found that only 30% of healthcare workers were being inoculated. We broadcast in Ohio, so let's go up to Ohio, the Buckeye State here, and Governor Mike DeWine reported that 60% of nursing home workers refused the vaccine. And then, of course, there are a number in the state of Texas, where I'm broadcasting right now, that talked about home health and assisted living agencies were not able to even service their clients because there were so many caregivers refusing to be vaccinated. But this isn't just an American phenomenon or just a phenomenon of people that voted for Donald Trump, as you'll hear in the mainstream media. Let's go to other countries. Reuters reported that half of the nursing staff in Switzerland's medical sector were not vaccinated. Only 30% of the staff in one German care home situation were vaccinated. Only half of the healthcare workers in a French care home were being vaccinated. That's just out of one of the Reuters articles. PBS the other day talked about the fact, and quoting from them, India started administering the second vaccine dose 2 weeks ago, but half of the frontline workers and nearly 40% of the healthcare workers did not show up. And so there may be some reasons for that. Maybe they've seen some people fall sick, sometimes die. We've had nursing home deaths in Norway, hospitalizations in Israel. Of course, there's been a lot of it associated with AstraZeneca. If you've not been following that, this is an article from Reuters from last month. AstraZeneca vaccine faces resistance in Europe after health workers suffer side effects, and some are now wanting to discontinue it. So this is something we'll continue to follow, and it is intriguing to me because you think about this. You have Presidents Jimmy Carter, Bill Clinton, George W. Bush, and Barack Obama and their wives have done a PSA encouraging people to get vaccinated. You have a number of people in this administration that have been vaccinated. We've done a program even about the fact that the mRNA vaccine is not the same as other vaccines, and yet you're still seeing quite a number of individuals who are healthcare workers or frontline responders who are not getting vaccinated. So an important issue to pay attention to, and we'll keep covering it here on Point of View, since sometimes it just gets ignored by the mainstream media. One last point, though. One of the articles I've posted here is from our good friend Robert Knight. You know, we all talk about getting back to normal. Well, I guess the word normal can't be used anymore. No more soap for normal skin care. No more shampoo for normal hair. Because, interestingly enough, Unilever, which is this huge kind of multinational corporation, found that the word normal for some of the respondents made them feel excluded, and some didn't like it, so they have decided to now take the word normal off of their packaging. Now, this is no small company. We're talking about 400 brands in 190 countries with about 2.5 billion customers. I mean, this is Dove, it's Axe, it's Brute, it's food like Hellmann's, Continental, Breyers, Lipton, Pure Leaf Tea, and much, much more. And so, again, I guess we shouldn't be surprised. More recently, they acquired Ben & Jerry's, so maybe some of that woke philosophy began to head there. And so Robert Knight said even the word normal can't even be used anymore, and then reminds us of all the things that have happened in the last couple of months. January for example, Disney decided to remove these programs from Disney Plus. That would be Dumbo and Peter Pan and Aristocats and Lady and the Tramp and The Jungle Book and Swiss Family Robinson. Of course, in February, as we've talked about before, Dr. Seuss, the various authors' books, about a half a dozen of them were no longer featured. And, of course, when they did the Read Across America Day, which actually commemorates the author's March 2nd birthday, well, you didn't hear President Joe Biden mention them like his predecessors, Barack Obama and even Donald Trump did. February, of course, was Black History Month. And so you'd think, well, Amazon might want to encourage people to watch documentaries of very famous African Americans. And you would be wrong. Amazon decided to delete the documentary of Clarence Thomas, which is entitled Created Equal, Clarence Thomas in his own words. That was something that actually, interesting enough, was airing on public broadcasting, but nevertheless, they pulled it off. I might just mention, too, that it had a very high rating. I think it had a 99% audience approval rating with Rotten Tomatoes. Of course, in February, we got to mention all the other issues that we've addressed as well, and certainly things like the decision to pull the actress Gina Carano from the Disney Star Wars series, The Mandalorian. And one last one, you have this comic strip, The Mallard Fillmore, which the Gannett newspaper chain has been actually featuring for 27 years. But when the author of that, Bruce Tinsley, said on the Washington Times his concern about this attempt to actually, through this transgender agenda of the new administration, allow biological males who claim to be females participate in women's sports, that was enough for him to actually be canceled as well. Speaking of cancel, I might just mention that my Viewpoints commentary today is on this idea of a cancel culture, and it deals with the attacks on free speech. And it's a piece that I already alluded to just a few minutes ago when we were doing the issue with Russ Vought, but I thought I'd mention it again because Jonathan Turley, who is being quoted, is an individual that is a law professor at George Washington Law School. Wouldn't necessarily agree with some of the conversation we have here around the table, but nevertheless is certainly saying that he's concerned about the attempt to censor free speech and reminds us, this is still the quote I love the best, the Constitution was written not only for times like these, it was written in times like these. If you go back to the start of the Republic, there were conspiracy theories. There were people not just trying to cancel each other, but people trying to destroy each other, even sometimes kill each other. And in the midst of that, that's why we had this emphasis on free speech. And one of the reasons why there is such a strong emphasis on the need for us to have more free speech. So my commentary is something I was hoping that you might read today. It's part of our Viewpoints commentary, and it's available there on the website at pointofview.net. And also, when you go there, you'll find another piece by Gordon Chang pointing out that China is really having trouble trying to feed itself. It's a very good piece, which we may cover later in the week, but we are paying attention to foreign policy issues, domestic policy issues, and even issues in the popular culture. But let's take a break. Eric Metaxas will be in studio with us. We'll be talking about his book, Fish Out of Water, The Meaning, A Search for Meaning of Life, kind of his story. And you'll have a chance to hear from him. And perhaps if you'd like to ask him a question or make a comment, I'm sure he would certainly entertain that as well. But let's, if we can, encourage you to go to the website, pointofview.net. We'll be back with more right after this.
Having civil conversations about important issues seems to be harder and harder. Various media outlets tell people what they should believe, why they should be outraged, and getting people to actually think, well, it can be difficult. Whether it's the gospel, tax issues, social policy, or just about anything else, you need to have solid information and clear thinking to address the hard issues. You need God's truth applied. And that's what you get in less than 2 minutes with Point of View's Viewpoints Commentary, a daily resource to help you be informed and think through the things we need to be talking about. It is free and will arrive in your inbox each day when you visit pointofview.net/sign-up. Sometimes we know we should say something, but we're silent because we're not quite sure what to say. Viewpoints Commentary can help you break the silence and change the narrative. It can make you a more equipped agent for truth. Get your free subscription to the Viewpoints Commentary at pointofview.net/signup. pointofview.net/signup. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kirby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kirby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live, this is Point of View. And now, Kirby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me. We have in studio with us today our good friend Eric Metaxas, and we're going to be spending some time not only talking about his new book, Fish Out of Water, A Search for the Meaning of Life. We might delve into a little bit of some of his other books. I pulled out just a few of the books. As a matter of fact, the whole shelf of Eric Metaxas books is starting to feel the weight of them because he has written so many. But if you're not familiar with him, individual whose books have been translated, I think, into more than 24 languages, has a podcast, of course, probably best known now for the nationally syndicated radio show, an individual that was a speaker at the 2012 National Prayer Breakfast, which is something that you in the book start out with. And if nothing else, Eric, we've known each other for a few years, haven't we?
You know, you were telling me that, and I thought, yeah, it's been a few years. It's kind of surprising to me. I'm amazed that suddenly it's a long time.
You know, and it really goes back to 4 radio studios, because we had one where you were kind of traveling around. That's the first time I met you. And then shortly thereafter, we met up at the Camp at the Woods in upstate New York.
Yeah.
And then you started having ones about Wilberforce. And pretty soon we started saying, I think I see a trend here, because it's Bonhoeffer and it's Martin Luther and all sorts of others. And I guess after you've done some biographies, you ought to do an autobiography in a sense.
I've wanted to write this because, you know, we can say it's an autobiography. I just think of it as it's my testimony. It's the story of how I came to faith, but it ends up being a memoir of my life until my 25th birthday. And I've wanted to tell this story for a long time, and I kept getting something would come in front of it. I got to do this first. I got to do this first. I got to do this first. So finally, I did it.
And it's a good opportunity because I've known parts of your family, Greek on one side, German on the other, and I did not know about some of the trips that you have taken and all of that. And it was, I guess, back to the issue of fish out of water. Not exactly what you expected. And I remember when, after you had actually participated in the 2012 National Prayer Breakfast and interacted with President Biden and Vice President Biden, I should say, and President Barack Obama, and made a joke about the Speaker of the House and all those kinds of things, to say, you know, a guy like me doesn't really expect to be in this company, but that is exactly what you found yourself in, isn't it?
Well, it's a strange story. I thought I wanted to start the book there. I mean, the book is about the first 25 years of my life, but I wanted to start the book in 2012 just to kind of say, you know, here I am in front of the President of the United States and all these people, and how did this happen? And, well, the way it happened was I wrote a book on Bonhoeffer, and how did that happen? Well, somebody gave it to me, and how did that happen? And I thought, well, I really need to go back to the beginning. So I start, actually, the first chapter is not chapter 1, it's chapter 0.
Yes.
Because chapter 1 is when I'm born. But before that, I tell the story of my dad's family in Greece and my mother's family in Germany, and then they kind of converge in me in various ways. So it's a story, I guess, ultimately, I mean, I should say this up front, I deliberately wrote it so that people who are like me theologically or politically, who were born-again believers, could share it with people who are not, the people who wouldn't read a Christian book, but who would read maybe just a fun literary book. The end of the book, of course, is about me bumping into Jesus dramatically, but most of the book up to that point, it's just a memoir, it's a literary memoir of me telling a number of very funny, crazy stories that are 100% true, and I thought, I've been telling these stories my whole life. I want to put them in a book. So
Yes. Well, if nothing else, it's one that you could hand to a non-believer. The first one, endorsement, Mark Halperin, and then Dick Cavett. Of course, you've had a relationship with that. And then kind of a who's who of all sorts of people that I've interviewed and you've interviewed as well. But it's a great opportunity to learn a little bit more about your background. But let's stay on that for just a couple of more minutes, because in some respects, you had an experience that in many cases would be seen as kind of the all-American success story, the Horatio Alger story.
Well,
maybe
you're the first person to say that, and I haven't thought of it myself, but you're right. It's the American dream. Your parents come from war-torn European countries. They meet in an English class in New York City. My dad's from Greece. My mom's from Germany. They met in an English class. The cover of the book,
it's him.
My father and my mother went on a date to the Statue of Liberty in 1958, and my mother took this photo. And it's a picture of my father in front of the Statue of Liberty. And this, of course, 5 years before I came into the world and a year before they got married. But it's kind of an immigrant story, and I didn't really think of it that way. The publicist made me say, he said, you know, this is really an immigrant story. That'd be a good picture for the cover. And so if you think about it, your parents come from those countries. They didn't have food. They didn't, they went through hell. They both lost their fathers when they were 10. And they meet in this English class in America, and they love America. And they're thrilled to have the ability to raise their kids in America. And then I get to go to Yale University. We get to, buy a house in Connecticut, and it's the American dream. But as we both know, without God, life is empty. And I was allowed to discover that by God's grace right after college, and to just say, what is it all about? I really was hostile to born again believers. I just thought that surely they're, half nuts or whatever. But I was in enough pain to be open to looking, and the Lord visited me really miraculously around my 25th birthday. But I thought in order for that to make sense, I have to tell what happened up to that point. And, I was the fish out of water all through my life until the last part of the book, when we find out who the real fish out of water is. But that's another story.
Well, it's a good story, but let's see if we can talk about that testimony, because near the back of the book, this is why you could hand this to a non-Christian, because they're going, oh, it's an interesting story. And then all of a sudden you talk about your vision, this incredible kind of dream, as well as your salvation. So let's talk about that for just a minute, because when you were at Yale, you crossed paths with somebody we just talked about a minute ago, and somebody endorsed the book, John Smirik, and he was a believer at the time.
Yeah.
You were in the same class. He would say things, and you would roll your eyes like, what in the world does this guy believe?
Well, he was a staunch Christian conservative.
Yes.
And in the early 80s, when I was at Yale, I wasn't sure what I believed.
Mm-hmm.
My father raised me to love America and to, but when you get to a place like Yale, it's so hostile to those kinds of values. And I was, I had my finger in the wind, like, well, okay, so what do the smart people believe? My parents didn't go to college. I didn't grow up among people who were educated. So I just was open. And I always joke around, if you have to go to a place like Yale, make sure you don't go there with an open mind, because that's going to be a problem. And I really took in that worldview and, was just drifting along with the zeitgeist. And when I graduated, I realized I don't know what I believe. I don't know anything. But if you're busy, you don't have to think about it.
Right.
But I had I got an English degree, English major. And if you get an English major, that's pretty good guarantee you're not going to get much of a job. You're not going to be that busy. And so I had plenty of time to think about not just what is the meaning of life, but whether life has meaning.
Yes.
I think that if you know there's a meaning of life and you can search for it, that's a little positive. But what if you don't know if life even has meaning? Maybe the meaning of life is there is no meaning. And I think a lot of the cognoscenti at people who live at places like, who get educated at Yale, who live in places like Manhattan, they kind of act like, well, we've figured it out, that there is no God and there is no meaning, and saps who look for it are, they're saps. And so I was not very happy, and I was drifting, and I was beginning to wonder, where does this go?
We'll take a break, and when we come back, we'll talk about the resolution of that, and then we'll get into some other issues, because I know that Eric Metaxas has some thoughts about what's going on in our culture. We'll talk about that right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kirby Anderson.
Attacks on free speech are increasing, so much so that even liberals are concerned about people who say that free speech is dangerous and needs to be controlled. Jonathan Turley is a law professor at George Washington University, and he acknowledges that many may view him as a free speech purist, but reminds us that his views used to be mainstream for free speech. He also explains that public or private censorship does not produce better speech. It only produces more censorship and more controlled speech. That used to be the liberal view concerning free speech, but no longer. He reminds us that the Constitution was written not only for times like this, it was written during times like this. At the start of the Republic, the various factions, Republicans and Federalists, weren't just trying to cancel each other, but were actually trying to destroy and even kill each other. And there were rampant conspiracy theories back in that day. In other words, the Constitution was written in a period similar to ours today. He described some of the more extreme efforts. Last week, I talked about members of Congress who were trying to pressure various cable outlets and social media platforms to drop Fox News and any conservative commentary. An article by two law professors called for what Jonathan Turley termed Chinese-styled censorship by arguing that China's control of its media is better than the freedom we grant to networks. He concludes by assuring us that he doesn't believe that today's activists will succeed in removing the most watched cable news channel in 2020 from the airwaves. That may be true, but they may succeed in knocking off other smaller programs, and that should concern us. I'm Kirby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For a free copy of Kirby's booklet, A Biblical View on Loneliness, go to viewpoints.info/loneliness. That's viewpoints.info/loneliness.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, if you'd like to join the conversation, let's open up the phones, 1-800-351-1212. Eric Metaxas with us today in studio. We're just privileged to have him. We have a link to ericmetaxas.com. I think everybody probably knows how to spell his name now, but if not, it is on our website, pointofview.net, and you can find out a little bit more about his radio program, all his blogs, his previous books, and all sorts of other great material. But I thought for at least a few more minutes, we'll spend some time fish out of water, but in particular, let's get you saved here, because after all, that's one of the very significant and pivotal events in your life, and one of the reasons you wrote the book in the first place.
Oh, it's exactly the only reason I wrote the book is because I wanted to tell the story of how Jesus got me. It was like it was a miracle of miracles. There's no doubt. It wasn't a blessing or wasn't I think it was a miracle. It was a flat out insane miracle of the Lord. And I think part of the message is that the Lord knew that I needed that because I was so gummed up intellectually. I was not able to think my way in the right direction. And so he spoke to me in a dream around my 25th birthday, and it changed my life overnight, literally. It was a total miracle. But it's right at the end of the book, and the book is, it's mostly preamble to that, because I think I said before, I want non-believers, people that would not read a Christian book, to be able to read a book and to just enjoy the crazy ride, because it is a crazy ride. And then at the end, they're going to be a little challenged, but it's not till the end. So I say to people, if you can think of somebody like that, don't tell them, oh, it's a Christian book, or just tell them, read this. I think you'll enjoy it. A lot of it is funny. And I think that people want something funny. People want something entertaining. And And I really think that, these are all true stories, and I only put in the ones that I've told a million times, which are because they're funny, half of them. So, but not to say, hey, here's a book, about Jesus, because it's not. It's a book about somebody who didn't even know, is Jesus real? Is God real? I was just floating along, trying my best and failing, of course. But at the end of the book, I kind of tell what happened, and what happened, there's no denying it. Your life has changed completely.
And again, my savior is a fish. And
now that's a dumb Faulkner joke. Nobody will get it. But my whole life I've wanted to put this in there. My whole life, my adult life, since this happened, because I make fun of William Faulkner, the modernist author, throughout the book. There's a couple of passages to the end of the book where I'm going through these hellish experiences, and I'm reading Faulkner. If it's not bad enough, I'm reading Faulkner while I'm going through these hellish experiences. And so in one of Faulkner's more pretentious modernist novels, he has a chapter, and the entirety of the chapter is the one sentence, "My mother is a fish," because it's this fractured modern, it's not worth going into. But I thought at the end of my book, I have to put in a chapter, "My savior is a fish," because actually that's the miracle at the end. Is it's God speaks to me in a sort of symbolic way. Christians know that the fish symbol represents Christ, but for me, being a Greek, my father always would talk to me about the meaning. He would say, "See that fish on the back of a car, that chrome fish? That's the Greek word for fish, ichthus, and it's an acronym for Jesus Christ, the Son of God, our Savior." So I always associated Jesus Christ with the fish. Right. So in the dream, the Lord speaks to me in this symbolic language, but it was really instantly life-changing. And so we find out that Jesus is the fish out of water. And what happens if a fish comes out of water? He dies. And that's, Jesus came here out of his natural medium into ours to die, so that we could join him in returning to the medium for which we were created.
Yeah. And again, chapter 39. So it's the last part of the book. And so it is a kind of book that you can give to someone else. And I don't think I'm, if anything, telling anybody about the conclusion they didn't know. We had Joel Rosenberg on yesterday, and of course you can't talk about some of the novels because they don't want you to talk about the conclusion, but I think we can talk about the conclusion here.
Oh, yeah.
And one other point before we get into some of the issues in the news, and that is humor. I've always said that it's unfortunate that Eric Metaxas has had to write so many serious books, because you are a stand-up comedian. I mean, anybody that's ever been around you and watched you start speaking, and I've known you now, 15 years, and, Veggie Tales, sometimes I say, I bet Eric wrote that piece, and all the others, and the lines you use and all this, and you've had to write about William Wilberforce and Bonhoeffer and Luther and all sorts of things that don't play to your humor. So this one does tell some stories.
You're the first person to say that, and you're absolutely correct. I try to squeeze in some humor into the Luther book, and even it's there in Bonhoeffer and in Wilberforce. If you look hard, there are moments.
There's a little bit of it.
But you're absolutely right. When I was writing this book, I just thought some of these stories are insane, and if you tell them truly, they're very funny.
Yeah.
And the ability for me to be able to do that was really enjoyable. But I have had people, the greatest compliment as a writer, people would say, I was crying because I was laughing so hard. And I thought, that's the greatest compliment you could give me. But a lot of people have said that, and I'm thinking, okay, so this is not just this one person, because these are funny stories, but to be able to communicate it so that the reader is laughing and embarrassing, his wife at the beach because people are looking over. I thought that's the greatest compliment, that I got.
So lots of funny stories in here, and you certainly can enjoy that. But I thought it'd be remiss if we didn't spend some time talking about what's going on in our culture right now.
Yeah.
And I guess it'd be fair to say that the person that you supported did not end up in the Oval Office. And so it's a difficult and really challenging time for us as Christians, don't you think?
Well, it's a challenging time for us in a couple of ways. If Biden had won legitimately, which I genuinely doubt that he did, it would be a very tough time for me and for anybody who believes in, the founder's vision of America and the Constitution. But the very idea that I'm not convinced that Biden won legitimately, and many people aren't, but they've been told, shut up, don't you dare say that. When somebody tells me in the United States of America, don't you dare say that, I know they're the ones that have a problem and they're hiding something. You don't behave that way toward people on the other side of an issue if you're convinced you're right. You don't tell them shut up. And so the way people have been treated and the way the media and the big tech and the Democrats have behaved, that's not the way winners behave. That's the way people who are afraid of something behave. And I've been really grieved, and I do think that there's enough evidence to warrant very, very serious investigation. And the fact that they have treated it, as I've said, and saying, no, there's not, shut up, there's nothing. No, I just think, well, lots of intelligent people that I know who know way more than I do are absolutely convinced of a number of ugly things. And if you don't have the ability to understand that this country cannot function unless you take that seriously, if you wave that off, I know you're hiding something, or at least you make it look like you're hiding something. So the fact that I was, knocked off of Twitter and knocked off of YouTube and all this kind of stuff for saying what? What did I say? I said what I thought was right and true, and I feel like I have an obligation. It's not like I'm making much of a choice. I think that in America we have an obligation to speak the truth. So I really am grieved, and I think that even if Biden had won, which I don't think he did, but if he did, the policies and the things that they have done already are just staggering. I'm amazed to watch it day by day, but I think the only good side is that anybody who voted for him can now see what is happening. And the other thing, which is like almost funny, I am absolutely not convinced that he is leading the country. I don't get the impression that he's in charge, he's leading the country. And I think to myself, by the way, that's not constitutional. You cannot have the people vote for somebody, again, assuming they did, and then have him say, well, I'm going to take a walk and you guys handle it. That's not, either the president has to behave as the president or he has to hand the reins over officially. So for him not having a press conference, it's been, 50 plus days. I just think, what is going on? And how can you treat the American people that way? They deserve better, And so it's, other than that, how was the play, Mrs. Lincoln?
Well, we'll take a break and take some phone calls, 1-800-351-1212. And, I write my commentaries more than a week in advance, but my commentary today, which people have had a chance to hear, is where we're quoting from Jonathan Turley, who is law professor at George Washington Law School. And when we come back from the break, I'd like to talk to you about that, because whether it's Jonathan Turley or Alan Dershowitz, who I've had on this program a number of times, Glenn Greenwald, of course, Jordan Peterson. I can make a long list of individuals who wouldn't agree with many of the things we talk about around this table, who all to a person are saying they're fearful of the left. I mean, the old liberal idea was, though I may disagree with your view, I support your right to say that.
Yeah, that's dead.
But now free speech is dead, and that's attacks on free speech is my Viewpoints commentary, and it relates very much to the conversation. And most importantly, the phones are ringing, as you might imagine, with Eric Metaxas. So we'll come back and take some phone calls, too. So if you'd like to join the conversation, 1-800-351-1212. If you'd like to sit back and enjoy the conversation, that's taking place as well. But we need to take a break for these important messages. We'll be right back.
Sometimes I think about seeds. You ever stop to consider that some seeds become entire trees and some trees grow up and produce fruit? Other seeds become flowers or vines that bring us vegetables or berries. And some trees don't have fruit, but they're just pretty, especially in some parts of the country when it comes to the fall colors. Yes, sometimes my mind goes off like that. And I also think about such things when it comes to the seeds that so many have planted in the quest to impact our nation through Point of View Radio. You may think that your gift is a small thing, but like a seed, it can grow to have an impact beyond your imagination. If you want to see beauty again in America, consider planting a seed today and making a difference by joining the Point of View Truth Team. Get the details today, right now, by visiting pointofview.net/team or call us at 1-800-347-5151. Plant a seed for a great future. Cultivate truth. Pointofview.net/team and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kirby Anderson.
Back once again in studio with us today, Eric Metaxas has been talking about his book, Fish Out of Water. Let me encourage you to get a copy of the book. You can probably find it in your local bookstore, but we also have a link to the Eric Metaxas content. And again, you can click on his picture, scroll down, and it will take you immediately to ericmetaxas.com. If you'd like to join the conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Let's head out to Georgia, WLPE. And Fran, you're on with Eric Metaxas.
Hi, I just want to thank you for what you said about the election, having the courage to do that. I agree with you.
Well, Fran, God bless you. I want to say that I think a lot of people are thinking this way, and it really makes me angry that anybody would dare to tell Americans to shut up and not to speak that way, and then even to threaten them and say that if you talk that way, you'll be accused of inciting violence. That's what people say who do not have the truth on their side. If you say things like that, that just gives me a clue you're hiding something. And I think, listen, my attitude would be I'd be thrilled if I found out that I was totally wrong and that Americans were dumb enough to elect Joe Biden. I'd say, well, that's the story. God spoke, in this way because that's the American people. It's what they chose. But to not be convinced of that, to have enough information to think that that's not true, I think, well, that's not going to be okay. I'm not going to be one of those people that's going to keep quiet with that. That's the end of America, and it gratifies me that there are folks out there like you who, you're keeping your eyes open. So God bless you.
She's from Georgia, and I thought, just before you came on, we were talking about the fact that in Georgia right now, you have an attempt in both the Georgia House and Senate to look at various ways to address issues like absentee ballots, voter ID, and the rest. But it was interesting yesterday, I'm hard to say, the Senate minority leader, used to be the Senate majority leader, Mitch McConnell, was saying if indeed they want to get rid of the filibuster, because Stacey Abrams, you know who that is, said it's time to get rid of the filibuster so we can push through the For the People Act, which would take all of the worst things of the 2020 election and federalize them and institutionalize them, and said there would be a price to pay for that. But right now, the only thing keeping us from having elections, the Equality Act, and a variety of other immigration, gun control issues is the fact that you have a 50-50 Senate. Yeah. And if you don't have a filibuster that requires 60 votes, Katie, bar the door.
Well, but isn't that the point? This is how cheaters and corrupt people behave. I mean, this has happened before in history. The Nazis took over without a shot in Germany. We have over and over seen this, and there are plenty of people on the left, like Naomi Wolf, who was in my class at Yale, speaking out.
We quoted
and there
her
are
last
other
week.
people speaking out, because there are people who have enough courage to say, no, this is not the American way. This is crushing freedom. And if every American doesn't speak up, if people are afraid to speak up, then it's on them, because then you become Germans in 1933. Well, I don't want to be the one to speak up. Well, okay, well, then you're going to go along for the ride, into the abyss. You have a responsibility to speak up and to risk whatever it is that you have. And I think that now is our time. I never thought that I'd see anything this dark in the greatest country in the world. But, I've said it bluntly. Many of our political leaders they're far worse than I thought. I'm of the opinion that Mitch McConnell is a skunk, and that Stacey Abrams is unspeakable. These are not people behaving the way our leaders are supposed to behave. And we, the people, have to say enough is enough. We need people who understand the founder's vision, who understand the Constitution, and have the guts at a time like this to do what it takes to represent that vision. If you don't have that, get out of the way, because somebody else needs your seat.
Somebody was sitting in there a while back, was Dennis Prager, and you know him, and he makes the distinction between the left and liberals. And you mentioned Naomi Wolf. She's liberal, and we mentioned some of these others just a few minutes ago, whether it's Jonathan Turley or Alan Dershowitz, and we can make the long, long list. It's amazing how long this list is of people that thought as liberals that we would always defend free speech.
Of course.
And all of a sudden, they're looking over and seeing the cancel culture, canceling one right after another, and saying, and of course, course, what Dennis Prager and others have said is, if you're a liberal, your enemy is not conservatives. Your enemy is the left.
Yeah.
And they make a distinction between liberals and the left. And the left really controls the academy.
They are cultural Marxists. Let's say it. They are cultural Marxists. They are the enemies of American-style self-government and democracy. Old-fashioned liberals are not. They have different points of view than we do on some things, but they're not the enemies of democracy. And the reason cultural Marxists are the enemies of democracy is because Marxists are anti-God. They are very pro-atheist and pro-secularist. And you cannot have American-style self-government and democracy and liberty and freedom unless enough people have a view of the universe that includes God. If you strip that away, then ultimately power is all there is. There's no truth. And we're seeing them behave this way, and a lot of Americans don't know what they're thinking. What is this? Everybody's going crazy. Well, that's what this is. This vision, it happened in the French Revolution. It has happened many times. Human beings who are sinners will go in this direction, and blood is the result. This is never a wonderful path to utopia. And I really believe that in America we have enough people who understand this that we will fight back. We won't allow the country to be swamped by cultural Marxism. But the leadership is horrific to me. I'm just staggered at the lack of courage in many Republicans especially.
I might just recommend a book, If You Can Keep It, because that gets into that. And again, this was a country which was created for a moral and religious people, and we certainly are not surprised in some respects by what is unfolding as we turn our backs on God. But let's go to another phone call. And on the Good News Network, Gary, thank you for calling today. What's your comment or question?
Well, first off, thank y'all so much for what you're doing. We really, really, those of us average citizens in America really appreciate the fact that someone is being the voice for us. So I wanted to say that. Secondarily, however, after this last defeat, how do we trust the vote anymore? How do we even trust the fact that anything we do at the voting booth will actually have any impact?
Well, that's a good question. Why should we trust the vote? That's why I'm so angry. Exactly. I find it completely despicable that our leaders were willing to look the other way. I thought to myself, this is everything, folks. The house is burning down, and you're acting like, let's just walk down the street here. No, you've got to deal with this, and they didn't deal with it. And so I don't know the answer, but one thing I know is those of us who think the way we do, we've got to fight like hell. We've got to use our voices, and obviously I'm not talking about violence, and this is what's so funny, that even the fact that I have to say that tells you how absurd things have become. But we, the people, cannot let this stand. And one of the things that a lot of people are doing is they're praying, and they're praying and praying and praying. They're saying, Lord, we're looking to you. You gave us this country and these ideas. Help us. And I really do believe God does act in history, and if we, the people, do the right thing and pray as well as doing whatever it is we can do, whether it's run for the school board or do everything we can do, I believe God will intervene. But we, the people, have to really speak up.
One of the books that I've been recommending to people is a book by Rod Dreher, who I know you know, and Live Not by Lies. And it seems to me that quote from Alexander Solzhenitsyn, that we should be speaking the truth and live not by lies, came from the fact that he's seen people that lived behind the Iron Curtain. These are people from Slovakia, and Hungary, and Poland, and others, where they were supposed to accept these lies. And this whole cancel culture right now, I think, is working because as soon as they attack anybody, whether it's a celebrity or just a person out there on the street, the first reaction is to say, okay, well, then I'll just lie about this, and I'll apologize, and I'll take a break so that I can reflect on the harm that I've done by speaking the truth. And it seems to me that we need to stand up for truth more than ever.
Well, we do. Rod Dreher, he gets hysterical. He accused me of having blood on my hands because I emceed the Jericho March. So he kind of cuts both ways. I admired that book, but he himself thinks that people like me, that I'm a white nationalist, or that I'm mushing together Christian faith with nationalism and stuff. And I really reject that, and it saddens me that somebody that I've known so long would believe that. But I think that People can make an idol of politics. People can make an idol of a president. I know that I and most Americans who have loved this president because he's stood strong for some things, we're not making an idol of anything. That what we're trying to do is serve God faithfully in the realm of politics, in the realm of the culture. And I really think that people use terms to shut us up. They say, "Oh, you're a white nationalist. Oh, you're a bigot. You're this or that." And I think, no, you're really wrong to say that, because you have a kind of a truncated view of where faith can go. I think our faith needs to live in the culture.
Let's take a break. We'll continue our conversation right after this.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Once again, if you'd like to join the conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Eric Metaxas is with us, and let's go out to David in this case. David, I think you have some comments.
Yes. Eric, thanks so much for what you have written, and thank you for the stand that you've been taking. I agree with you. Our first speech from this president, at the end of it, I don't know, did you see that speech or hear it?
I don't know. I'm not aware of him giving any speeches. I'm not convinced on any level that the dude is running the country. And to me, he's mentally unfit, and he should take whatever test they made Trump take. You cannot have a president behaving like a doddering automaton. It's unacceptable. And I think that everybody knows he's not running the country, and that's genuinely unacceptable. He needs to take some mental acuity tests, or he needs to step aside and let the other communists run it.
He said, whatever you want me to do next, Nance.
Yeah, well, of course. Whatever you want me to do, Nance, I'm just here for you guys, man. You know, he knows that, listen, he probably, we don't know this, but another scandal we haven't mentioned, I have never in my life ever seen anything as scandalous as what happened with the Hunter Biden laptop story. I said to myself,
there you go.
I know that the press is corrupt and left-leaning. I've never in my life seen it as openly obvious as when they just kicked that story to the curb. We will not cover it. They dared to call it Russian disinformation. That's the stupidest thing anyone's ever said. They dared to say it. It's like they're saying, you know, American voters, they're stupid. We can do anything we like. And they didn't cover it. And then I had Patrick Byrne. I'm sorry, not Patrick Byrne. I had Patrick Byrne on my program talking about the voting stuff. Jack Maxey. Jack Maxey, I had him on my program discussing the Hunter Biden laptop. He has the contents of it. He's put it out there on the web. Anybody can look at it. But the point is that in a normal culture, everyone would have said we cannot have a president who is profoundly compromised with China, with Ukraine, we have questions about whether he's compromised with our chief enemy in the world, on the world stage, communists who are wanting to take over the whole world and who have certainly infiltrated this country. We need somebody to stand against that. So the idea that the press just didn't look at it, I thought this is like out of a bad novel. This is not a good novel. This is a bad novel with cardboard characters. And evidently Biden basically, I get the idea, is so compromised that he said, well, if you let me be president, I'll just be the front man for you guys. And, we won't, I don't even need to talk to China. You can do that, Kamala,
Yeah. Well, again, you wonder who's running it. Susan Rice, Barack Obama, just don't even know how it's run, and even how you could have a bombing mission to Syria when I don't think he was even in the Situation Room. So there's just a lot of questions. But let me take at least one more phone call. So we'll make this one last one for the day. Go out to Arizona, KNLB. Martha, what would you like to add to the conversation?
Actually, I need something from the conversation. I'm an average person. I pray, I support, I do the action items. But compared to people like, when I hear First Liberty talking on the radio and stuff, I don't know what more we can do. And it's kind of my always asking question, because I believe this is the beginning of the wearing down of the saints. And if this is just the beginning, that's a real bummer. So what can I do to stand against what is happening to my country? I mean, I think I need a step-by-step 1 through 5 plan of, okay, average citizen can do X, Y, and Z, because I don't feel like I can do enough. It's just sliding. Our whole country is just sliding into the sewer.
Well, I agree with you. And, people ask me that question all the time. I don't know. When people say, what can I do? I don't know, because I don't know what I can do. I know I can do what I can do. And if I don't do what I can do, well, that's on me. So to the extent that I can, I do whatever I can do. I speak whenever I can speak. But I really think this is in the Lord's hands. I'll be honest with you. I think that we have to do everything we can do and pray, and we need to rejoice in the Lord always and trust that the Lord, when we speak to him, he hears our prayers. And this is not, we're not speaking into a vacuum. He hears our prayers, and I really do believe that what may come out of this is revival in America, because people are so hopeless looking at things. We realize that unless God moves miraculously, our hands have been tied in many ways, but we can pray and we can do a number of things. And I just want to say to everybody, if everybody has courage and will do what they can and speak when they can and not be afraid to speak and not be afraid to push back. This is America. We're free. But if we don't behave like we're free, then we're not free. And I think that I have real hope. I'll be honest. I have hope. But I think part of my hope comes from the fact that I know God hears our prayers, and I don't believe he has yet turned us over. So that's a long way of saying that I think we need to do whatever we can, and we need to pray and look to God to fix this, because I don't think there is a natural plan. I'm not saying I don't think it can happen. I just think that we genuinely need God. Many times in the past we haven't. I think we do.
One of the things we should pray for is courage. That's one of those virtues that is in very short supply. And you see this every day with the cancel culture, because you always have these individuals having to issue this groveling apology that I didn't know that my words were going to hurt someone. And so I'm going to take time off to look at the blind spots in my life instead of saying, wait a minute, I'm going to stand up for the fact that, you're wrong and I'm right. And I'm not right because I'm smart. I'm right because I believe in God's word. And it seems to me that standing up for truth and having courage in the midst of this is the only way to end this cancel culture,
well,
right?
Look, I think half the time the only response is you need to get a life. Whoever is criticizing this or that, get a life. Grow up. Do something important so you have better things to think about than how your feelings were hurt. It's childish. It's embarrassing when adults behave that way. And I really have to say that those people who issue groveling apologies, I mean, if there's really something to apologize, fine, but most of the time there's not. And this is kind of, you're feeding the beast. You're feeding the devil, really. You're giving power to the enemy when you behave that way. And we need to stand up. And I just think that, again, our leaders are the most pathetic. I mean, most of the GOP are not heroic. Trump was heroic. It's one of the reasons that with all his flaws, so many Americans admired him, because he was not having the nonsense. We need to live that in our own lives, and we need to elect people who are that way. We need to throw out people who are not that way. All the fake conservatives who are in the GOP, their days are numbered. They're not going to last, because we've seen what it can be like. We've seen some leadership, and we're not going to go back.
We have a number of people watching this, and if we turned on a microphone in that room, there probably have people applauding right now, but I suspect people are as well. But since we're almost out of time, we do have a link to ericmetaxas.com. I know you're heading on to your next speaking engagement. If people wanted to schedule you to speak, or if they'd like to follow you on Twitter or Facebook, or to go to your website, listen to your radio program, or most importantly, get a copy of your book, they can find it all there at the website, can't they?
Actually, I've been telling people since, a lot of us have been canceled on social media. If you go to my website, ericmetaxas.com, sign up for my newsletter, because I send out everything in newsletters. That way, if you don't follow me on social media, you'll get it anyway, because I do have kind of an urgency to communicate, especially in these strange times when you don't know if you can.
Especially when they take you off of Twitter. And all of a sudden,
it's happened to me. I got bumped off of YouTube, and their excuse was they found a video from months ago that I had an interview with Michelle Bachmann, and they knocked me off of Twitter for 2 weeks because of something they found from 3 months ago. I said, this is just madness.
It is. Eric Metaxas, always great to have you in studio. And if nothing else, I want to thank all the individuals involved in this program. I hope you've enjoyed this conversation. We'll see you back here tomorrow, right here on Point of View.
Having civil conversations about important issues seems to be harder and harder. Various media outlets tell people what they should believe, why they should be outraged, and getting people to actually think, well, it can be difficult. Whether it's the gospel, tax issues, social policy, or just about anything else, you need to have solid information and clear thinking to address the hard issues. You need God's truth applied. And that's what you get in less than 2 minutes with Point of View's Viewpoints Commentary, a daily resource to help you be informed and think through the things we need to be talking about. It is free and will arrive in your inbox each day when you visit pointofview.net/signup. Sometimes we know we should say something, but we're silent because we're not quite sure what to say. Viewpoints Commentary can help you break the silence and change the narrative. It can make you a more equipped agent for truth. Get your free subscription to the Viewpoints Commentary at pointofview.net/signup.